Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Janet Jokala, infectious disease physician and former treasurer of the American College of Physicians. Today's Kevin MD article is The Service of Humanity, Recommitting to Physicians' Ethical Duties. Janet, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Delighted to be here.
All right, what is your latest article about?
Well, I have been thinking a lot about humanity lately, and the first line in our oath, which is we dedicate ourselves to the service of humanity and what that means. So that had been mulling around in my mind. That said, my husband and I were driving through central Illinois recently. We went through Eureka, Illinois, which is a teeny town, about 5,200 people. It's dominated by Eureka College. And at Eureka College, they host the Ronald Reagan Museum. Now,
Mhm.
Ronald Reagan went to college there. He grew up in Dixon, Illinois. He went to college at Eureka, and now there's a little museum there with Ronald Reagan memorabilia. So we thought, we'll stop and check it out. We like visiting presidential libraries, so we thought, well, this would be interesting. So we stopped in there, and there was a bunch of stuff like photographs, documents, but then there were these quotes on the wall. So just kind of spread out through the room.
Yeah.
It's not a big place. And these quotes just jumped off the wall to me. And I was taking pictures, and it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that President Reagan said these things. So some of the things he said, I'll just share them with you
Yeah.
briefly. One was, respect for human rights is not social work. It is not merely an act of compassion. It is the first obligation of government and the source of its legitimacy. And then another one about immigrants. All the immigrants who came to us brought their own music, literature, customs, and ideas. In fact, what they brought to America became American, and this diversity has more than enriched us, it has literally shaped us. And then, there's another, there are a whole bunch, but the third one I'll share with you is, we don't lump people by groups or special interests. And in the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, there's no room for intolerance and not even a small corner for bigotry of any kind. Many people are welcome in our house, but not the bigots. And it's like, I had no idea he said those things.
So you juxtapose what Ronald Reagan said with the current environment politically. Just tell us the thoughts that you were going through your head as you read those quotes.
It's like, I mean, I was a young, impressionable college student when Ronald Reagan was in office. And at that time, HIV/AIDS was, that was ballooning, on the horizon. And President Reagan wouldn't talk about it. And that's in large part what I remembered. So seeing his quotes now about these things juxtaposed to today, it was in many ways really jarring. It's like I had no idea that President Reagan said these things. And it's like these are such foundational principles and aspirational principles. It's like, gosh, is there some way we can rally around these principles today?
And this was the impetus to get you thinking about how this related to the Hippocratic Oath,
Yeah.
physicians in service to humanity. Bridge
Yeah.
us. Tell us about that bridge.
Yeah. So as I had shared, I've been thinking about what does that mean? We dedicate ourselves to the service of humanity and realizing seeing those quotes from Ronald Reagan, in some ways it all ties together. And you can think of Ronald Reagan's quotes and comments on those topics in light of our oath about dedicating ourselves to humanity. In some ways, that's what President Reagan was doing, dedicating himself to the service of humanity. And it made me think, as physicians, there's very specific things that we can do, of course, with our knowledge and our skills, talents, and all of that. But there are many, many ways that humanity can be served. And it just made me think more broadly about all of that. So.
And sometimes, as physicians, we're all siloed in what's happening locally.
Yeah.
Sometimes we need to take a step back, remember why we took the oath, and think about what we could do outside our silos, right?
Yep, that's so true. When you think about it, there's so many different ways that we can serve humanity, whether we mean humankind or the human race, or by being benevolent, by being compassionate, empathetic, and all that. So there's so many different ways that we can do that. So we can certainly do that in the exam room. We can do that in the hospital. We can do that with our colleagues. We can do that with our learners. We can do it in the hospital boardroom if we're in decision-making positions within the leadership of our practice or the hospital. We can do it in the halls of government if we want to pursue that route, or we could volunteer somewhere if we, want to do that. So it's a very personal thing, I think, that as physicians, we do have unique skills and talents that we can bring to the table and really do this.
Well, let me put you on the spot, Janet, and ask you to share some specific stories or specific people that maybe you could share with us so we can see what that looks like. So tell us about some stories about physicians who fulfill that part of the oath to serve humanity.
Right, right, right. If you and your listeners have not heard the testimony from the Minnesota physicians that they gave before the state capitol, this was towards the end of January, I think January 30th, it's well worth a listen. Now, altogether, it's about 30 minutes or so long, so it's a little chunk of time, but it is absolutely inspiring, and you realize that's exactly what they're doing. And then this group of physicians also wrote a letter to the New England Journal just saying, look, this is what we're doing. And again, I'll have it. There's a couple quotes from that saying, we care for, and this is all in January, early February, when whatever the ice metro surge, whatever it was, going on. We care for the people of Minnesota, regardless of whether we share our patients' opinions or immigration status or religion or political views. We care for our patients because they're human beings. And what the physicians were describing is their patients were afraid to come in for their appointments or come into the hospital for whatever it might be. So, not only were all the other things going on that we were reading about in the news, but from a medical point of view, there were some really serious harms taking place because their patients were not able to get care. And so the Minnesota physicians stepped in and were doing that. So
So you framed what they did as courageous. And why do you believe has become courageous in this time and age for physicians simply to state that they will care for patients regardless of their immigration status? Tell us about some of the potential or perceived threats that or repercussions that they may face just by speaking out.
Kevin, yeah, will do. It's sad that we're even in this space, but the fact is that's the reality. And Kevin, I'll say too, I have family and friends in Minnesota, so I was back there visiting, and this was between the times when Renee Good and Alex Preddy were killed. All right, so I was seeing it on the news and kind of experiencing the tone and the tenor of what was going on firsthand. But that said, the physicians, when you read articles about this, the physicians were very careful. Some of them did not want to identify where they worked because they did not want to draw attention to the ICE agents, that there might be patients at their locations that could potentially be targets. In the same way, there were, so for some of these articles, and there was another kind of short news article not that long ago in JAMA that touched on this, but there were some physicians who also did not want to give their names because they didn't want to be exposed and exposing the same thing where they work, potentially putting their patients at risk and instilling more fear in their patients and their patient families. So I think that's where we are now. At that time in Minneapolis, certainly there were a lot of federal agents there, and that kind of exacerbated all of this. But what also really struck me is that this is not a Minnesota issue. The sad thing is this could happen anywhere, and it has a direct impact on our patients. And that's where we come into play.
Hmm.
So I really admire the Minnesota physicians. I respect and thank what they did to put themselves out there and to put that, submit that letter to the New England Journal and just alert the world that this is what's going on.
You write in your article that physicians should blanket themselves in this courageous humanity. I want to again do another juxtaposition and talk about what we talk about a lot on this podcast and on Kevin MD, which is burnout and systemic
Yeah.
pressure. So I want to ask, how can physicians find that internal strength to blanket themselves in courageous humanity when facing burnout, systemic pressures, and all the challenges that they face on a micro level on a daily basis?
Yeah, Kevin, that's a really important question. And again, I want to thank you and the others you've had in your podcast who have touched on these issues and talk about these issues. It's really important and it's so core to what we're faced with and what we do every day. That said, I think we individually have to dig deep to hang on to that, whatever that is and whatever that means for us as individuals, that courageous humanity. And maybe the courageous humanity is who knows? I mean, it may be something different for everybody, but it might be having to forgive me, but step away from some of these settings where things are just so painful and so, for lack of a better word that comes to mind, toxic. Okay. But otherwise, it's also, finding that place of compassion and empathy to be able to connect with one's colleagues and to try to brainstorm and come together, for solutions for everybody or for the group or whatever it might be. So I think it's a very personal thing on some level with whatever it may come down to. And for some people, maybe it will be they'd realize they want to do something like this Haven Watch, which I, found I touched on in my article. What was going on in Minneapolis apparently is there were some detainees who were released at all odd hours, including the middle of the night. And these were in, the time was January, early February, freezing temperatures, but they didn't have a coat. They didn't have a phone. They didn't have their documents. I mean, nothing. And, observers there noticed this and they launched Haven Watch so that volunteers could provide a warm car, a
Hmm.
coat, and a phone so they could help people get home. So the point is there's a lot of different things that we potentially could do. I think it becomes very personal in terms of what do we need to do to protect, in some ways, protect that inner core of humanity, which we all have, and just not lose sight of it. So, yeah,
So, Janet, obviously, you also teach at a medical school, so you interact a lot with medical students
yeah,
and residents, and these are people just at the beginning of their medical journeys. What
yeah.
do you say to them when they're already overwhelmed with just by learning medicine about how political healthcare is? How do you prepare them for when they become attendings and it isn't going to be as simple as what they learn in medical school, but they need to brace themselves for some of the political realities of our healthcare system? What do you say to the students that you see every day?
Yeah. Yeah, Kevin, there are no easy answers. There are no easy answers. In many ways, it's a lot of the same things that we've been talking about. Stay true to yourself, find your passion, whatever it is, and don't let go. Just hang on to that, stay focused on that, and things will work themselves out in one way or another. And we do have some of these conversations about whatever it is, the larger picture. And so, certainly on a one on one level, I try to support the students as they're thinking through some of these things. But it's a lot of the same thing. Dig deep, hold on to what's important to you, what you're passionate about, and just never let that go. I mean, I think that's so critical. In addition, there are so many ways that people can get involved if that's their path. It's not necessarily the path for everyone, but if their path is to get involved and kind of work on some of these issues on a larger scale, to be able to do that through their professional society or other related avenues, that's a great way to go. I mean, for me, I've been involved in the ACP since I was a resident. I'm so appreciative, so grateful. ACP has been a great avenue in terms of advocacy and those things to help address some of these issues. And so that could be a path for, for others as well. So it's personal. It gets very personal.
So that leads me to my next question. Talk to us about some of the ACP initiatives to help these physicians reconnect with their oath to humanity.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's so interesting, Kevin. Again, there's so many different ways that one can think about this and directions we can go. On ACP's website, there's an advocacy page and there's an action alert you can sign up for and get regular emails in terms of actions that ACP is taking and advocating for on Capitol Hill. There's so much. It's like, how much time do you have? There's so much that ACP is doing very broadly, whether it pertains to the larger issues like vaccinations and things and other things going on at Health and Human Services, or things like payment reform, patients before paperwork, and those related kinds of activities, prior authorization. So there's a lot of work that ACP is undertaking in a lot of different avenues. And again, I think for individuals who are concerned about these different issues, there are so many different ways that they could get involved with ACP, and their voice can be amplified that way. And I'm grateful for that. I'm very grateful for that.
We're talking to Janet Jokla, infectious disease physician and former treasurer of the American College of Physicians. Today's Kevin MD article is The Service of Humanity, Recommitting to Physicians' Ethical Duties. Janet, as always, let's end with take-home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much. I think one is to find your passion, stick to it, to dig deep and find that humanity and that way that you want to, or you need to express that humanity in your daily work and in all aspects of your life. And then for whatever it may mean to you as an individual, right, to blanket yourself in courageous humanity. I mean, I try to do that. I try to do that as well, but to blanket yourself in that and practice that in all of the different aspects of our life. And I think we'll be better off for it. So thank you so much.
Janet, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. Thanks again for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.